to see if you will put some kind of information in there for us if you are apartment owners or if you are buyers. All right, so today we're talking about maintaining your apartment. And before we get started, I should actually say the Australian Apartment Advocacy is what we call the voice for 2.5 million people in Australia who actually own an apartment. And that may be that you're an apartment owner when it comes to actually an investor, or otherwise somebody who actually resides in your apartment. And we do research, and many of you probably have done the survey on our behalf, which is fantastic. And we also have at the same time lobbied at the moment in WA and certainly Queensland for greater jurisdictions to allow for people to move into an apartment and have a peace of mind that their apartment construction is safe. We're all about confidence. We're all about empowerment as an association, and we're a national association. And, you know, we have a number of things that we are known for, which I'm very proud of as the CEO and founder, and that we're trailblazers, we're tenacious, passionate, we actually believe in best practice, and we're all about empowerment. And that's where these kinds of education sessions that we're doing today with Alliance FM, with Danrae, and also hopefully Seymour Group are all about making sure that we empower our apartment owners. So we've got Greg Keat currently on the screen here, and he's from Alliance FM. Hi, Greg. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, IT.
Good. See ya. Good. Daniel from Danrae, but also his awesome sister, Renee from Danrae. Say hi, guys.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Right, perfect. And Paul Seymour, are you in the room yet? He may be a bit elusive like Elvis. We'll have to wait and see, but he's not showing up. So sorry about that, guys, but I'm sure he will actually add some further comments down the track if he doesn't join us. All right, so talk to me quickly, guys. Like, we hear the terminology reserve or sinking fund plan or 10-year maintenance plan. What does that mean, and why should people in apartments be aware of it?
Who do you want to talk to? Me? Do you want me to pick that one up?
Go for it, Greg. We can start with you, darling.
Okay. Basically, it was introduced to create for the stratas to create a fund to be able to fund high cost maintenance items like roofs, lifts, and things like that without having to raise a special levy. And often, you know, like a roof, for example, if it starts to leak, nobody's been inspecting it, they have to replace it, you know, it could cost, you know, $50, $100, $200, $500,000 to replace. So, so they're pretty big capital expenditures. So that was the main reason that they brought in the plan. It also helps with future planning as well for other maintenance items, waterproofing, things that will break down over time.
So this is interesting because when you move into an apartment, like, you know, and we do promote this, it's the easy breezy lifestyle, but it's different from moving into a house, right, that you might have built or bought on a piece of land.
Me?
Anyone?
Yeah, well, it's a large complex. So, you know, there's painting, there's continually things going on. You know, this regulations basically mean that you have to properly maintain your property. You also need to properly maintain it for insurance purposes. And of course, you know, a well-maintained property will hold its value if it's kept in good repair, and will also be cost effective and cheaper to run in the long term if you're on top of the maintenance constantly.
Right. So prevention better than cure, I guess, is the kind of like best analogy that we should be talking about, and especially like where we've said there, you know, if you're actually looking at a lift within your apartment building, sometimes you're looking at $240,000 plus. And even if you are 100 apartments, generally if there's 100 apartments, there's more than one lift. So these are the kinds of large spikes we're hoping to actually prevent occurring within a budget. that can actually place additional financial kind of stress on apartment owners that are already facing the inflation at the moment that we're seeing, of course, across Australia. So from our perspective, Renee, Danrae focuses more on the roofs. And why is that, or Daniel, important when you're thinking about an apartment building, do you think?
Well, when it comes to roofing, well, I will make one point. With roofing, it's often a set and forget on an apartment building. And what owners often forget is that the water, obviously runs downhill. And so the first point of protection is actually the roof. And most apartment buildings actually have a flat roof. So most buildings will have some form of membrane or, protecting the roof. So why is it important? Firstly, because once if that membrane does leak, you're actually looking at multiple issues occurring in the roof of the apartment building, which can lead to obviously multiple defects once the water ingress starts to penetrate the concrete. So maintenance is very, very key, because a lot of the membranes that exist on the market require some form of maintenance, inspection or maintenance, and that's actually part of the warranty terms of a supplier.
And warranty is key, right? So this is what's
100%.
important about understanding with an apartment building. It's a commercial build, is that right? The classification is commercial.
Yeah, so you in an apartment, the classification's a class 2 building. However, even if you've got other classes of build, say for example retail and then residential, it's all encompassing. So yes, 100% agree. It's all encompassing, either commercial or resi. Under that, yep.
Great. So, it does come in many forms. In some, it's the sinking funds. In others, it's capital works program. In others, it's a maintenance plan. These are all things that are kind of like occurring within across Australia. But in some states, such as Victoria, WA, and New South Wales, it is compulsory. I think this is very interesting. I think someone's actually drawing on my screen. How bizarre. But anyway, we will continue on. All right. So a 10-year maintenance plan, when you're looking at an apartment building, like what are we talking about? What are the most critical things that we need to be aware of when it comes to actually repairing or replacing?
Well, obviously the roof is a main structure that you have to maintain that, and of course it affects people's living. Waterproofing is basically the same thing. Is quite often the balconies and things are above apartments or even above cars and things. And of course, if you've got leaks through your waterproofing or your roof, it can affect your structure as well. So the National Construction Code regulates that a building must be protected from water ingress, and that includes the built environment. So painting is another one. Quite often when painters paint it, well, when buildings get built, they paint it in, let's say, like a domestic paint, which carries a 1-year warranty, has a lifespan of probably around about 5 or 6 years. So, if you had, say, like quite often a high-rise building, for example, might have to scaffold the whole building, and the scaffolding becomes a very expensive part of the repair. If that's the case, then I would probably tend to hire a NACE level 3 inspector to get him to write a specification and probably get a 10-year warranty coating on it, or a 20-year warranty coating on it. And that specification belongs to the strata, and all the contractors, painting contractors, will be quoting on that specification rather than the owners being at the mercy of the painting contractors' specifications. Does that answer the question?
I need to unmute myself. I think that's a very good point that you've raised there. So it is very important that, you know, when you're dealing with a commercial build, which is what a class 2 or apartments are, you're not going to know all the answers, right? Even I defer to specialists to actually tell me about what should be happening with waterproofing or with concrete structural elements, right? Because that's not my specialty field. So I think when you're sitting on a council, I think it's very important that you realize you have a limited capability. And with all due respect, so is your strata manager. And that's when you actually need to get a project manager involved in these kinds of projects. Yes, you may pay a little bit more, but the terminology, you get what you pay for, I think is certainly crucial here. And, you know, we've had situations where, you know, some kind of companies which are waterproofing are only offering a 5-year warranty, and that is not long enough because you get sick building syndrome, as what Daniel was talking about. That creates mold. Then your insurance company won't pay out all the items within your apartment that have been, you know, affected by mold. It's a real dilemma. Don't know if you want to talk about that, Daniel, because that's certainly something, and then we'll go to you, Greg, about that you're seeing, correct?
Oh, 100%. So, especially in New South Wales, you know, you may have heard that the whole, you know, the Building Commission has released, as you know, all the legislation around around defects, in particular waterproofing, fire and structural. So so as far as that goes, yeah, the defects are running rampant in New South Wales. We've actually got, well, it's termed as, or pretty much a leaking building syndrome. The one thing I wanted to mention in this particular situation is also it's important to understand when the building's handed over from the developer to the strata managing agent, and then which owners then purchase, there should be a lot of handover information with regards to the lifespan of certain materials. So that would be the go-to to initially start developing a 10-year maintenance plan on your building. Oh, sorry, Sam, you're on mute.
I am on mute. My concern about that is sometimes the developer appoints the strata manager, and there is an element of loyalty more to the strata manager, more to the developer than to the lot owners, right?
Yeah,
and we
right.
see deferral in terms of then action being taken against a certain item. So I think, you know, we always endorse that you actually have an inspection within the first year of actually moving into the apartment build, and then on an annual basis after that, because that's when you start to see things occurring. And if you're within that 6-year general time frame that most states work within, that gives you some element of reprieve towards the builder, and obviously that will help compensate you. But
Yes.
yeah, because, you know, at the end of the day, you have an asset. Sometimes it's worth 10 million, 70 million, 100 million. I always say that's probably the biggest asset I'm ever going to own in my life. And so you have to actually chip in and make sure that you actually take care of it as a collective. Anyone who kind of like bails out, unfortunately, is doing its, you know, owners a disservice, would you say?
Yeah, agree. 100% agree.
All right.
I just want to add a little note to that when you do get your property inspected, I always find it beneficial if you do it in the middle of winter because the water is a bit more prevalent. It allows for moisture meters to be used because water often is not visible. So a good inspector will be able to use a moisture meter on areas that you know, maybe a general house inspector would not know to use it on. So,
and I think that's important. You're right, because you do need to actually have a specialist in apartments, not a house and land inspector. And Greg recently did an inspection for me for a young lady that I hold very dear to me, who was buying an apartment, and he found one that actually had actually put an offer in that had presence of moisture and mold. And luckily, we got her out of that contract, right?
Yeah,
so you don't know what you don't know.
Sam, you asked me to look at the common property as well on top of her unit. So the the strata in itself, just as a whole, had been doing piecemeal repairs, and they were all botchy jobs. So so in that itself was a good representation of buying into a poor strata as well.
And I think that as we kind of like aware of the fact that defects are becoming much more common in our conversation and dialogue, especially via media, that people are wary of that. And in certain states, such as Victoria with Section 302 and New South Wales, you have to declare if there is actually defects within the apartment. And that does make your apartment very unsaleable, right? Because a bank, especially if you have cladding, combustible cladding on the outside, no bank is going to touch that with a barge pole. Let alone lend money against it. So from our perspective, you know, we don't want to see buildings with defects. We want to identify them very quickly. The quicker you repair them, the less they'll cost. The longer you delay, the more they cost. Would you be agreeable to that?
That's correct. Yeah, sometimes if you leave it too long, they will cost up to 10 times more expensive. Particularly when you're dealing with, say, water ingress, and you leave it for 5 years, and then you have to deal with concrete cancer on top.
Yeah, 100%. I'll actually cover that in once we go deep. Yeah, I'll go deep into that. Yeah.
Great. So we advocate that when a kind of like a maintenance plan or building management plan is being done, that you do need to have someone come out and inspect. You know, I saw a strata where they actually quoted replacing the roof, but there was no tiles or kind of any roofing. It was a flat roof, like Daniel talked about, you know. So they're kind of like advocating or putting in figures which are not actually dependable upon, because they don't reflect your building. It's an estimate. An estimate does not reflect what is going on with you. And it actually needs to list all those items that need to be maintained, including your pools, gyms, you know, equipment needs to be replaced. Remember, the more amenities that you have, the more you're going to pay in strata fees. But if you can afford that, and that's the lifestyle you're looking for, and it's also sometimes shared across a larger number of people within a complex, it can be certainly affordable. But remember, they need to be maintained. What you want is a time schedule of when these items will be addressed, the budget estimates for that. They do need to be realistic. I've seen elevators quoted $150,000. That's not a typical elevator kind of cost. Replacement is normally about $100,000 more than that. The last thing you want to do is have someone knocking your door and say, we need $12,000, which I have actually seen. And then we've also seen, you know, some of the strata companies out there or OCs having to borrow $5.5 million. That is not what we want to see. That is not the easy breezy lifestyle that we actually advocate for. And so we do want to make sure that once you actually take ownership of an apartment, you realize you have a responsibility. And in some states, that means a lot. So make sure you check out your legal requirements. But typically you're looking at 10 years time frame. It does need to be created by a specialist in apartments and updated regularly. In some states, every 5 years. It would be wise to have that building inspection done every year, because if you can actually identify a crack early on, that does allow you to actually take some kind of works that will actually prevent a much bigger problem down the track. Any other comments from our panel?
Yeah, I'd like to make one, particularly on the program of works. Generally, say smaller stratas would work off, say, the 10-year plan, for example, whereas larger complex, the document would be too big to work from, but you would take from that document the items that need to be done within 5 and 10 years time, and you stick it in a smaller document, which is more of a running sheet, and that would be broken down into, you know, certain sections, you know, stuff that needs to be done, let's say, in the next year or two, stuff that needs to be budgeted in the following years, and so forth. And you've got quotes, you list quotes in there. So you've got a specific amount that you have to budget towards. And that document would also go to the Council of Owners and to the AGM. So all the owners know what's going on in the complex, what's going to be coming up. Let's say you wanted to do a lobby upgrade and they've scheduled it in 3 years' time, for example. Then, it just allows a smaller document, but with more specific items, allows a lot better
management,
acknowledgement from the other owners. And plus, when you update your 10-year plan, those past documents will be fed into the 10-year plan.
Great. And I think, as from my perspective, it is something, an extra layer, but you are talking about a collective ownership that you have, and hence a collective management. And often people complain to me about strata levies, but I say, well, and don't take this the wrong way, guys, but if you counted the number of times that your husband went to Bunnings when you were living in a house and land and added that up, you probably have a much more kind of dollar figure than if you actually were paying your strata levies. But strata levies are separate to a sinking fund, correct, Daniel?
Yes, that is correct. So when you're talking about your I suppose the levies that are required contractually, then you've got your sinking fund, which is the available funds that you've got to obviously then spend on your remediation or your upkeep of the property, etc. Yep.
Now, Paul from Seymours, have you joined us? I thought I'd let Paul in. All right, we'll wait to hear if it's you mute. So from my perspective, these are the kind of some of images that Greg Keats sent through to me today. And I'm going to relay a short story and then we'll let the panel talk. So I was having a Zoom event the other day with a gentleman who was complaining. He had a commercial in the property he owned, plus also residential, and he was complaining about how some of the apartment owners were parking in the car park for special needs, disability. And while he was showing me the car park that he was talking about, I could see this foaming amount going on the rooftop. And I said to him, can you please just give me a minute? Can you zoom into what's behind you for me? Take the camera and show me. And it was clear that there was actually a situation occurring there with the rooftop in terms of concrete cancer, you might say. And I said to him, don't worry about the car parking, get your strata onto that. That's the more important thing to worry about. Now, talk to me, Greg, what are we seeing on the left-hand side with this image?
Okay. Generally, waterproofing, and you're probably well aware of this, is there's a lot of waterproofers that will present to the owners a cheap repair system. Okay, the one on the left is what they call a negative bandage, which is basically a hydrophobic material applied to, basically in this case, a crack, or what we call in the trade a fissure. Now that's a crack through the concrete slab. Through that concrete slab, there will be structural reinforcing, your upper and lower reinforcing. So any rust that will occur is from the wetting and drying of steel, and that's where your concrete cancer comes. So the negative bandage is actually stopping the water from coming out.
So it's containing it, is allowing it to erode quicker.
It's exactly right. It's containing the water for longer. I would, if it's just a budgetary thing, of course, in this building, they need to remove all the landscaping above to actually repair that. This is one of probably hundreds of these cracks in that building. So what I probably would have done, just to protect the cars underneath, I probably would have put an evaporative tray that's mounted probably about 300 off the ceiling height. Allows you to evaluate what's going on and the volume of water coming through. So
And if you have stalactites growing out of your car park ceiling like I do, alert, 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 it is an issue. Would you agree with that, Daniel?
100%. So yeah, so the stalactites are basically water ingress into the slab, and the water is then drawing out the salts from the concrete, and then you are effectively getting the same effect as in a cave as you would get those stalactites on your slab. That's what's actually happening. Just to add to what Greg was saying too, from the looks of that, that's probably an incorrect approach on how that was tried to be repaired as well.
That's very polite of you.
Yeah, but Greg is right. So the proper way to repair that is actually from what we call the positive side, which is above that. But whatever's being done there is actually not correct in how you would approach that leak. So that leak right there should be actually injected with a membrane, not just covered up and held back by putting something along the crack. Yeah, that's not correct.
But this is atypical, unfortunately, of some of those dodgy builders where they are called to site to rectify something. They apply this, and then it's not a major work, so there's no warranty on it. And they know it will actually hold until maybe the 6 years is over, or they have, Phoenix, their company. So, it's very important in our education kit. It actually talks about asking about the waterproofing. Do they have the manufacturer's warranty? Because the warranty, of course, as both of you know, is often longer than the 6 years / 6 years, 6 months that we get through the state, correct?
Correct. That is right.
Can you hear me?
Oh, Paul, hello.
I've been listening to everything. Also on those warranties, the warranty's only as good as the applicator.
Correct. So it needs to be inspected by the waterproofing manufacturer.
Absolutely. If they give you 12 or 15 years, and you're lucky if you get 8 nowadays.
Yeah. But also there's technology out there that can do a screening over the waterproofing to actually then detect any kind of electrification between the pad and obviously to a concrete base. And that does allow you to actually break it down. But, it's all about the fact that there is solutions out there. There's just, where is the appetite for best practice? That's the kind of question that we're asking ourselves as well. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. I thought this was typical of sometimes what you might see in a 15 to 20-year-old complex where you have a step like that. It seems like a little kind of issue, but if you have a fall, what might that mean to you? And then on the right, Greg has provided a kind of like a downpipe, and look at the roots that are growing through that. And I know I was talking to someone today about planter boxes, and as beautiful as they may be, they can also be the bane of your life. Anyone want to comment?
But planter boxes are an absolute pain, because guaranteed 100% they will leak.
We need to find a system, I think, Paul. Let's see what we can invent. Oh, Renee agrees with you. She's laughing. Daniel, your thoughts?
Actually, probably Renee can add to this. But the amount of planter box requests for repair that we actually get is phenomenal.
I think I've had about 4 today, Daniel.
Yeah. So there you go. So they look great, yes, or that but the problem is always that it's got to do with the design. So often the wrong membranes being used. Often builders will just go for the cheapest.
Yes.
And every supplier will tell you that it's root resistant and it's being tested. The only membranes we've ever seen that last are always the sheet membranes.
Yeah.
And all the other membranes we've seen, they've got a certain lifespan. Once you get to one tiny pinhole, the roots are going to go rampant through the membrane.
I agree with that. And a colleague of mine, Dr. Tony Matthews from QUT, has actually been looking at the different types of kind of systems that could be used to contain the roots. And they're talking about inserting like iron rods, so the roots actually wind around that, for example, rather than trying to explore outside of the planter box. They look beautiful, but they can also be a bit of a nightmare. And especially when you have this situation where they probably have gone down maybe 10 meters. And no wonder something's not draining away from their bathroom, right?
Yeah,
Well, actually, that one there was 40 meters away from the planter
40.
box.
Wow.
wow.
And the problem with that one there is the planter boxes are great, but you could actually put in some IOs in the waste pipe, which would allow clean out points. So if roots did get in there, you've got clean out points. And I think the new waterproofing standards, Australian standards, I think they actually may address clean out points from the top as well.
Correct.
Good. That's good to know. Perfect. All right. So I think we've got some more. Look at this. So the number of times that we get calls from people who have got mold occurring in their apartment, whether that's lack of ventilation, often lack of waterproofing. This is not a good look. This would be like an alarm bell for me. And I always work on red, orange and green. And this is like triple red for me. Any thoughts or comments from you, gentlemen?
One of the hardest things is to source in where the water's coming from. You know, that by the time it's got to that stage, it's, as you say, it's red light already.
You need to actually have an intrusive investigation, right? You need to cut away the panels. You need to look at what's going on. You may not want that, but you know, there is no other choice from what I can understand, correct?
Absolutely, I agree.
I might just explain this one. If you notice the darker patches where the water is, that's actually the plaster repair from the insurance company.
Oh.
So the insurance company went there and repaired the consequential damage, but nobody bothered to investigate the source.
Source the leak.
Source the leak. So that photo was taken during investigation work. So we flooded several areas and we found the leak on an adjacent balcony on the opposite side of that wall. So that wall was actually like a fibre cement sandwich sheet paneling, you know, with the concrete inside. So it was basically just coming in and just going down the voids where the joins were.
Thank you, Greg. So if you have this in your room, do not actually allow for it. Get out because it will affect your health. Remove anything that's your items in that space, because if you try and claim on insurance, the likelihood of getting that kind of compensation if you've allowed the items to stay in the apartment for several years is virtually, I would say, nil, but don't quote me on that. All right. Look at the left-hand side. I am now addicted to looking at balconies. It's a major issue for me. It's very geeky, but I can't drive anywhere now without looking at a balcony. And this kind of situation for me, in terms of looking at that kind of stress point, would that be what we might call it? Discoloration. Often when you see a balcony with white streaks running down it, I've seen one where a succulent has been growing between the seams. Yes, I did take a photo and put it on LinkedIn. Gentlemen, why am I being anal? And I won't apologise for that, but why am I being anal about apartment balcony kind of floorings and also waterproofing, please?
Well, it's probably, Greg will probably agree with this, it's probably one of the highest defects reported in apartment buildings, I would say. And there's the thing with balconies is that it's the joining part of the building from external to internal. So
it's common property, right? So it's the responsibility of the body corporate owners corporation.
Yes. So you've got the and it's because it's external. You're getting more building elements moving with the heat and the cold, etc. And often same problem. You get builders that are using the cheapest products possible, that waterproofing included, where you're getting these building elements moving around, and you get cracking of the waterproofing, The salting that you see is evidence of water getting into the tile bed or into the slab, which is drawing out the salts.
Yeah.
Same problem. And then you get things like what that photo where you get those points or the stress point, and that render looks like render is actually cracking. So then you'll get water ingress into the render, and then the same thing will happen. You'll get salts. You'll get the white salt starting to form on the outside of that balcony.
I might just explain that photo. That column that's going into it is actually going into a small upstand wall. So the stainless steel column is not fully stainless steel. It's actually steel coated with stainless steel. And they've cut the tubing on site, and the end of the tubing is not sealed or protectively sealed from any moisture getting in. So what's happening is the base of that column is now rusting, and the rust is expanding and it's pushing out the masonry elements. So this strata will have to remove that rusting column and replace it.
So, Greg, that's a big deal, darling. Like you just say
It
that
is.
quite, nonchalantly. But to remove a kind of like a column of that nature and replace it, what are we talking about cost-wise?
Well, you'll have to scaffold it for a start. The masonry needs to be removed.
Yes.
And you're going to have to fabricate new columns. You're going to have to support the existing structure that the column's going to come out before it comes out. So it is substantial cost, but to be honest, it's very common this to happen.
Yeah.
The other thing is too, it could be a balcony post as well. That's been a steel post that's cut off as well. So it's just a supporting column just makes it a little bit more complicated.
So what could they have done earlier that may have prevented that from happening?
Well, they should have basically had that stainless steel coating done in a factory and then installed it on site as a prefab item, rather than getting a column and docking it to site, docking it on site and fabricating a base or whatever. Yeah. It just means that it's not, or they could have docked it on site and fully coated it and protected it before while it went in. So you've got to have the Australian standards actually call for a waterproof membrane to be around the base of columns.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Daniel, Paul, any comment?
Yep. No, it's one of the banes of our life at the moment. We've just had one of our consultants go and inspect about 100 in one building. So we know all about it.
You don't want to be having your balconies. I've had situations where balcony glass has been breaking and falling down, and people have not been able to go onto their balcony for 2 years. Like, that is not cool. I don't like that at all. So there is an element of a requirement to make sure that the actual product on site is meeting Australian standards, and that's really up to the supervisor or the certifier, correct? Yeah. And then secondly, like as a committee or a body corporate owners corporation, you need to make sure that you're kind of like, as soon as you see anything, any kind of sign of discoloration like that, it's an action item. Am I correct?
100%.
I love it when I'm told I'm right. All right. So, okay. So on the right-hand side, we've got a fire door. What's happening here, Greg? Tell us. I know, but maybe tell the rest of the audience, please.
Okay. The fire door was constructed to a particular size. They're not cheap. They're expensive. It's basically a failure of the coating system. So before they actually put on the metal surround, they should have fully coated the timber. So no water could get, if water got in behind the metal, it wouldn't contaminate the timber. In this case, it's actually come through where they've checked out where the hinge is. So where the hinge has been put on the door, they've cut out, but they haven't put any protective coatings on in behind it. So water's got in through where the hinges are. So if they just spent a bit of time, they maybe fitted the door, took it off, coated it, made sure it was fully coated, and then replaced the door once it's all been fitted, it would have been safe.
So Paul, if it looks like this, what's happening? Is it opening easily? Is it closing easily?
It does close, but
It's obviously swollen the door.
it's swollen the door and it's no longer fire rated.
Correct. And when it's no longer fire rated, what does that mean?
Well,
It
it
means
means
you've got to
that,
replace it.
Yeah, that's right. It won't withstand the 2-hour rating that it
Right.
So
is supposed
you
to
won't,
have.
it won't, the building won't be compliant.
So if
No.
you have a fire, you will be in danger.
Yep.
The-
From the building and also your insurance company.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
and if there's loss of life, if the strata company is aware of this, and there is a fire and there's loss of life, or there's damage or maiming or something like that, the council of owners may be liable for prosecution.
Correct. And civil action, which means dollars, right?
And the work safety will actually take that action, and they have taken action on those sort of things before.
Yeah.
Queensland backpackers, for example.
Yeah.
There's quite a few. There's been a couple of fires in Sydney where, a couple of the council of owners, sort of disagreed with getting something repaired, and they pay the final consequence, unfortunately.
Because once it's in black and white, whether it be in the form of, like in Queensland Work Health and Safety Report, or down south where you call it something else, once it's in black and white and something happens, liability just swings back to them.
Yeah. And from my perspective, you want to de-risk yourself, but that means you've got to make the right choices. So it's not always driven by the cost. It is driven about the fact that you have a very large asset on your hand, which will more than likely increase in value, but only if you look after it. And like I made the analogy before, you wouldn't drive your car for 5 years and not service it. It's the same kind of philosophy with an apartment building. You do need to maintain it. If you don't, there will be consequences. Now, Daniel, I'm going to cross to you because this is one of my favorite kinds of topics, would you believe, is talking about roofs and why we need to also make sure that we're choosing the right kind of waterproofing methodology. Do you want to take us through this slide, and then we can refer to Paul and Greg if they would like to make any kinds of comments?
Yes, no problem. So, yeah, I think it's a topic that's not spoken about quite often with regards to specific maintenance of membranes. And a couple of points that we've made on this slide. The code does stipulate that any like external wet area in a building needs to actually suffice a one in a 100-year rain event. So what we're finding in the industry is that a lot of new commercial or strata buildings are actually leaking within the first 3 to 4 years. So the construction of the build really has to ensure that the quality of membranes that are used are going to last that, or be, suffice that 100-year rain event. The other couple of things to consider is that in the Australian standards, it actually does say all the defect or the causes of defects. And one of those is actually insufficient maintenance of membranes. Another thing that's actually missed, especially if the membrane's exposed on a roof, strata owners need to keep in mind that Section 106 clause requires the legal obligation of repair and maintenance of common property, that being the balconies and roofs of a strata complex. And the last thing is that, which I mentioned earlier, in the fine print of any warranty on a membrane, it will say that it needs to have sufficient maintenance of that membrane. Otherwise, the warranty will be void.
You're on mute, Sam.
You're on mute, Sam.
I was going to say it's unusual for me to be muted. But you're absolutely right. And you don't want to actually have that warranty, you know, in terms of then revoked, because that's like your, I guess your catch net. If that's gone, then it means that you're paying for it to actually take the next steps. Am I correct?
Yeah, 100%. So that will actually have a knock on effect. So as the supplier is going to look and see, well, you know, and sometimes it's actually quite obvious that it hasn't been maintained. So they're going to look if there's actually a problem. They're going to find a get out. They're going to try and see what the hell is going on. And they'll say, well, look, you know, you should have maintained this. You should have inspected that. Then that leads to further risk, because then you've got issues which Greg and Paul might be able to talk about, is then leading into then insurance issues. If you've got damage internally because of the membrane, it wasn't inspected, etc., then that can lead to then further risks with your policy and coverage.
Yes, correct. And the last thing you want at the moment is, because we're seeing, you know, certainly kind of like insurance costs escalate up to 40% in some instances per annum. The last thing we want to do is overexpose you and increase those kinds of insurance costs, correct?
Yeah.
Well, in some cases, the insurance company deny coverage to some of the stratas until they actually rectify. Waterproofing is common, or water issues. I might just expand a little bit on the membrane warranty a little bit.
Please do.
Quite often what you see a membrane that is down, maybe a liquid membrane, which is quite common, and then there's a leak, and the strata company gets a contractor in to make a repair. Unfortunately, quite often, a lot of these membranes are incompatible. So when they put a patch repair, they will react to one another over a few months, and it will eventually break down. So it won't last more than a year. So predominantly, the manufacturers will consider an existing membrane as a contaminant.
Yeah.
So if you're putting a new different type of membrane over an existing membrane, it's quite often common that it's not compatible, and the existing membrane is a contaminant, and you need to remove the existing membrane and replace the whole thing with a new one.
Daniel, you want to talk to this slide maybe about what you're thinking here?
Yeah, so I'll add to what Greg's saying is 100% right. So the common thing we see is, in particular with, say, on a roof with a liquid or bitumen sheet membrane, which I'll explain the differences in a second, but basically what we see with those two, very common, is contractors will be sent up on the roof and they will install a joint sealant or what's termed as a Secaplex polyurethane product. Generally, that's used quite a bit to seal holes and things in the membrane. That particular product will actually eat away, or vice versa, and cause further issues on the membrane. And cause you further defects to actually occur. So, and unfortunately, that joint sealant is actually the most common thing used by contractors, especially roofing contractors, to use on these membranes. So this particular slide was just to give general knowledge on the types of membranes that are out there in the marketplace. And often liquids are used. Every membrane has its place, but basically what we find is liquids are generally used in new build purely because of their low cost. But the problem with liquid membranes is and often it's the easiest to apply as well. But it's actually the most the membrane that needs the most attention with regards to its application, because you have to worry about the humidity in the air, the substrate, moisture content. I mean, that should be applied to all of them, but in particular, liquid membranes is very finicky. You've got to really get that right. And also the thickness of the application. So most contractors will get up there, roll it on, Bob's your uncle, it's applied. It's definitely not the case. You have to get the right thicknesses as per the data sheets.
Mm.
The more common one is actually bitumen sheet membranes. That's as you can see the picture below there, often a lot of flat roofs have a bitumen membrane. Often they're applied in 2 stages. One's a base sheet that gets heat applied, and then the top sheet gets applied. The top sheet has a granule on it where it's actually the UV stability, that protection of that membrane. Most common with bitumen sheet, they're not inspected. So what happens is that granule does wear away over time. And as soon as the sunlight then hits directly to the bitumen goes brittle, and then can crack, etc. So then we've got the last type, which is the PVC rubber types of membranes. They're often a single sheet membrane. They look very much like vinyl. And they're now becoming more popular. A lot of the overseas countries use PVC as a roofing membrane simply because of its flexibility. So it's the most flexible membrane, but also it's got a much longer lifespan than the other membranes. But it's the most costly when you look at comparison directly with material compared to the other two. But it's actually the most easiest also to maintain.
Yeah, I might just add a couple of things to that, if you don't mind, Daniel. The sheet membranes, well, you're guaranteed of the same thickness, but all you have to worry about is your joins and your upstands and things like that. And I always recommend to my clients that we get an independent third-party test, a spark test or holiday test, electronic test, whatever you want to call it, just to make sure that there are no breaches in the joins, or even in the liquid membrane is a common one that will have breaches in it. So yeah, I would always get it independently spark tested.
100%. One of the things I do note is a lot of the time we're coming in after the fact when the developers have built these things. And being developers what they are, they'll take the option of liquid over the other one because ease of application and cost which they bear in terms of normally it's a gross price. So it's very hard to try and convince them to put the PVC down, which is the better product, obviously.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they it's not so much putting down the liquid membrane either. They often leave out the fillet or the cove detail in the corner,
There.
and they won't return it up the wall to the surface level of the tiles. They won't wrap it around. They won't coat the bases of the columns. Just so many things like that. Basically unseen. You don't see it, so people are not going to know about it.
Yep.
No voice, Sam. You're on mute.
I keep doing this, don't I? In most states, they don't actually require you to actually be licensed to install waterproofing. And so consequently, you can't even be guaranteed that the person who's installed it is in fact just a painter and has no application according to the sheets or specifications as what Paul was talking about.
Yeah, that's correct. So in New South Wales, only fairly recently, builders can actually still technically waterproof, right? So now the new licensing laws will come in very soon in New South Wales, where waterproofers will actually be a specialist trade. So like any electrician, carpenter, or builder. So that's coming in fairly recently, but I don't know with regards to the other states. I think waterproofing, I'm not actually sure whether it requires a separate license.
Not in WA.
No, correct. And,
Yeah,
and Queensland it does, but Victoria is moving towards that.
I can't take a call. I'm on Teams.
All right. So go to this slide. This has been a rather unusual session, but keep going. Let's go forward here, Daniel. What's
Yeah,
this slide say?
so just with regards to roofing, these are key items basically taken straight out of the Australian standard of external waterproofing. So the key when we look at inspecting roofs, firstly, the one on the far left is straight from the standard on how to lay a sheet membrane. What we find is, you can see the obvious thing is the joints are staggered. So a common thing we've seen with regards to sheet membrane is the joins are actually in line. So you've got a single point of failure. And if you're talking like also a torch on, the joints should then stagger underneath the layers as well, so that you're not getting a part like a complete join all the way through to the slab. The middle diagram is showing you the ring or the clamping ring on a drain on a roof. So the membrane should be pressed up against the downturn. We find a lot of issues with regards to drain covers that do not do that, and the membrane isn't actually adhered correctly. So if you get any water, well, backing up, but also if the membrane starts to debond, you're going to get leaks in the roof because the membrane can actually turn upwards. So that's a very common one, inspecting the drains, and obviously maintaining things like leaves, blockages, things like that with drains. And the last one is the lap joints. So when we were talking about sheet membranes, the laps are where the failure can occur. And the laps ideally should be down, falling away. So your joint should not be the reverse, where the leading edge is where water hits that joint. So they're sort of the key things we look for with regards to the installation of a sheet membrane on a roof.
And I think this is very technical. I'm conscious that this is very technical, and I'm trying to obviously keep things. I believe this is important, but I'm also conscious of kind of like moving on, if I may, with the next slide. This is why you have specialists such as these gentlemen who kind of like understand what they're looking at. So what are we looking at here, Daniel?
So these are common faults. So one on the left, you can see where the membrane's actually coming away from the corner. So that's because the membrane hasn't been installed correctly. So you're getting debonding in the corner, basically. So that would be an immediate defect. So that would be something that you'd have to get the repaired. Other common defects are where, like we said earlier, where the joints are in the sheet as well. And the photo on the right is where we were talking about earlier, where there's joint sealant used. So the joint sealant there is actually should not be used to along that termination. It actually should be a bitumen-based sealant that is compatible with the membrane.
And I think this kind of like image always amazes me, despite the fact there's a difference in color. It's the actual sense that there's something actually like applied to that's going to provide a membrane, correct?
Yeah, so that's actually a PVC membrane right there, and that's actually been cleaned. So there's the before where the membrane wasn't clean, and we've actually pressure washed that membrane to restore it.
So sometimes it can be as simple as that?
Yep.
That's good to know. That's good to know. All right. So when you're creating a 10-year plan or a maintenance plan or a sinking fund, from your perspective, what's your top list item, gents, that you think needs to be considered? I'm going to start with you, Paul.
I think in terms of what we're looking at, and is your major cost items which are going to occur through the life of the building in that 10 years. And depending how old the building is, how the longer life items such as lift come back into the 10 years. Because those are the ones that govern your levies and everything else like that. And you need to schedule those and cost them and make sure that the poor old committee are not hit with a whammy of having to raise $500,000 to cover these costs. Forethought in terms of planning and aging of the products is very important.
Thank you. Greg, your comments?
Look, I always advise my clients to have at least the amount of money in their reserve fund that it would cost to replace the most expensive item in the building, i.e. the lift or the roof or something like that. If they don't use it, that's good, that's great. But, you know, quite often you will have to use it at some stage. And even if they sort of build up towards that, by the time they build up towards that, they're probably going to need to use it anyway.
Yeah.
Paint is one of the big ones.
I always endorse the waterproofing element within the paint work. Daniel?
Yeah, I agree. So I would be assessing the lifespan of, in this case, talking about the roofing membrane, how many years you've got left or potential years left, because then if that comes up within the 10 years, you really have to consider then what is the capital expenditure then to replace that item.
And from my perspective, you know, the benefits of
if you could just go back to that previous page, it's very important there. You say review every 5 years. We have a policy that is what everybody reckons. When you have these bigger buildings, I reckon you need to review every 2 to 3 years. We're doing some at the moment. We do annually.
Yeah, I
because
agree.
The costs are changing meteorically at the moment. Paint seems to be one of the worst ones. And committees defer things or bring things forward. So it is important on the bigger buildings to get that time span shorter.
Yes, I agree with that too, because there are deferrals. Don't defer, please. That's not okay. We need these things rectified in a timely manner. So, you know, at the end of the day, if you're going to sell your home, what would you do? Typically repaint, do some gardening, right? Make sure you spruce your place up. But when you're a part of a complex of 100 apartments, how do you actively make sure that you are keeping your property looking spruiky clean for the next buyer that might come through? Any recommendations?
I think, you know, quite often, you know, particularly in the older buildings, when you start to say, look at painting or waterproofing, quite often they have to be done in conjunction to one another, because the painting will actually flow and basically protect the walls as an ingress point to get behind a membrane. So quite often you have to look at things in a holistic approach.
Yes, that's good advice. Paul, Daniel?
Well, I think it goes back to the budgeting of when you're likely to have that major expense, and make sure that you're collecting enough capital through the years to actually cover for that expense. But I do agree, you do need a sort of contingency sum to run parallel to everything for unexpected items.
Yeah, and I'll add that you've got, with regards to the benefit of maintenance, you've got the membrane warranty, but you've also got the lifespan. So you can get a membrane that will actually outlast its warranty if it's maintained.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. And that does mean, like, you know, if you're living on the coast, you're washing down your building every year, right? There's things that you would do, but you don't know what you don't know. And that's why we have these information sessions, to make sure that we actually give you some good tips about what to be thinking about if you're on the committee or otherwise an apartment owner. Now, we've got some more events coming up. Elevators 101, the research results in each of the states, rain, hail or shine on the 21st of September, Housing for Our Future, Mr. Housing Crisis on the 3rd of October, and there's our link to our events. I'm just going to ask if anyone has got any kinds of questions that they would like to actually pose to the 3 panel members. Barbara, thank you. She says, thanks, good information session. Would like the recording and slides. Don't worry, they will be coming out to you, plus also to our larger database. Do we have any other questions being raised from our audience today? Well, that's a good idea. We must have obviously answered all their questions. So from our perspective, there is the phone numbers for each of the gentlemen who've actually been on session today. If you don't get this, once we send out this recording, you obviously can get that too. But if you'd like to email us, we will send out their details as well. Please note the states in which these gentlemen do operate. It's great that they bring a different perspective from each of the different states. Our sponsors, we'd like to thank. Obviously, we can't do what we do without them. So thank you very much to your support as well. And there's our contact details down the bottom if you would like some more information. Gentlemen, any last comments before we kind of like dial off from our audience today?
Good luck, and I just think it's worth getting your property inspected.
I agree. That's good advice.
I'd
No,
like
I
to
concur with that as well. You can never do enough to look after a building.
And why would that be, Paul?
You know, you've put an analogy there when you want to sell your house. If you've got it neat and tidy and everything's working, you've got a thing that you can sell. The same thing happens with a high-rise apartment block. If you keep it up to scratch and your maintenance, actual hidden costs disappear, and you keep on control of your costs that you do know of, like the waterproofing and everything else like that.
That's correct. Daniel, any last words?
I'd just like to say thanks for the opportunity, and I agree with the other gentleman. I look at it as if you service your car, I would be servicing the maintenance of the property too, because and treat it like an insurance policy. Maintenance is key, definitely.
It is key.
Absolutely.
Renee, darling, are you there? What's your last word, since you're the person that handles all of this key messaging on behalf of Danrae? Are you there?
Prevention is better than cure.
Prevention is better than a cure. A woman
Yeah.
after my own heart. Thank you, Renee. Well, I think that it's been a very informative session. I hope that you have enjoyed it today as well. It's been great having Paul, Greg, and also Daniel chat through their passions, because as you can see, they are passionate about what they do. And that's the kind of people we need in the industry, because then when something becomes a problem, we can actually get it resolved, right? So my takeaways, it's a big asset that you own. Please make sure that you're diligent by looking after it. Yes, that may cost money, and always the cheapest is not the best. All right, well, thank you very much, Paul, Greg, and Daniel. Make sure you do hire specialists. It's very important you have the right people do the job. And these gentlemen below are by the AAA endorsed by us, because they are best practice. So certainly if you need anything done, please give them a holler. And again, thank you, gentlemen, for your time tonight. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nick.
Goodbye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you,
Everyone.
Renee.
Bye.
Thanks,
See ya.
everyone.
Bye now.